hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.
My name is Ahmad Shakaraki, and on Street Talk we deal with political, social, and economics here in Michigan, the U.S., and abroad. Now, joining me tonight,
Dennis Burnside.
Paget Maynard.
Okay, man, we got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but I just want to briefly, I've been noticing the paper the last couple of weeks, and they've been talking about Jackson, Mississippi. They had a lot of water there about 2.5 or 3 weeks ago. And they've been having problems with water to drink, you know. And since July, they've been having to get bottled water. So there was two ladies I happened to read about in the paper. One's 84 years old, up and 72 years old, and they was kind of briefly giving us a history of Jackson. And she said that they'd had problem with drinking water for the last 20 years. 20 years of problem with drinking water. This one guy was saying that his water is like, sometimes it's brown, you know, sometimes it's another different color, and they can't drink it, you know. And he says when the people come to work on, supposed to be there to work on the water, they're cursing and going on, you know. So this is a real problem for Jackson. And again, it's the areas that most of the blacks live in.
Yeah, it's based on a tax system in the state of Mississippi, which is allowing Jim Crow to live on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Unlike most states where you have state taxes levied, put into a kitty, and then mm-hmm. allocated back to the counties and communities based mm-hmm. on need, at least ostensibly based mm-hmm. on need. Mississippi has a taxation system which is more or less no state tax, but a tax on localities mm-hmm. and property taxes, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So if you have an impoverished community, and those impoverished communities are overwhelmingly black and brown, mm-hmm. you have the inability to invest in infrastructure, including water treatment mm-hmm. and fresh water delivery to its citizens. So even before the floods happened, which knocked their water treatment plant offline, mm-hmm. you had dubious quality of the drinking water mm-hmm. and the water that people cook and bathe in, mm-hmm. per your article you were talking about. But now it's to the point where the water is impossible to drink. Mm-hmm. It's very reminiscent of what we saw with Flint, where yep. the water's coming yep. out of the tap mm-hmm. and it's dark brown mm-hmm. and it smells of sulfur and ammonia. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, again, that the locality does not have the revenue to fix or even maintain the water treatment mm-hmm. plants, so at a flood, and with climate change, we're going to see more and more of this. Floods and other catastrophes don't knock it offline. But even more concerning is when I read that even with the new infrastructure bill that was passed at the federal government by the Biden administration and the Democratic House and Senate, you still are going to have difficulty getting that funding delivered to the black communities like in Jackson, Mississippi, because it's at the behest of the state government, which is run, of course, by the sons of Jim and Jane Crow. And they will do their best to attenuate or even block those funds that should go into that community to improve the infrastructure. So what you see now, poor water, poor schools, poor medical services, but an overwhelming police presence. The money goes there, and this is not unique to Jackson, Mississippi, but it's a good example of what goes on.
Yep, and the guy was saying that in those areas in Jackson, the average pay for the people living in these different areas, $15,000 a year.
Yeah, in poverty.
Yeah, and he was saying that a lot of these people had to pay $5,000 to get their water to stay on.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not making but $15,000 a year, and you got to pay $5,000 of that for water.
For the delivery of water.
Wait a second. Are you saying $5,000 to keep the water on?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're only making $15,000?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are they going to eat?
Well, you know, hey, like Dennis was saying, you know, I mean, Mississippi, man.
Poorest country in the state.
The poorest country in the state.
In the country, poorest country in the country, with the lowest high school graduation rate, most childhood poverty, most teen pregnancy, most divorce, but they vote Republican consistently.
Yeah.
It's backwards, but again, it reflects a government that is Jim Crow Jr. without the legal parameters enforcing it. It's more now de facto Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And you can see that with the people who are forced to cook and clean and drink bottled water just to survive.
Yeah, and we're gonna go on and on this the next show, but the thing is that that kind of burns me is that I was listening to, it was Friday, listened to some show, one of the shows Friday, I think it was PBS. Anyway, the U.S. has given, what is it, with the country we at war with?
Ukraine.
The U.S. has given them $18 billion to rebuild the whole country, okay? And you can't give these people down there in these different areas, you can't give them $17-18 million, and we know it's not going to all get to the people in places where it's supposed to be, but you giving these people $18 billion to rebuild a country.
To sustain the country, they're not rebuilding it.
It's
maintaining the country while it's under attack from the Russians.
Yeah.
But it's a different pot of money, to be fair.
Yeah.
The federal government can give directly to Ukraine.
Yeah.
They can give them weaponry and food supplies and medical supplies, etc., because there's a unanimity among the Ukrainian government that they need this for their people. You don't have that unanimity in Mississippi. Unanimity in Mississippi means if you're white, it's right. If you're black, get back. And so the federal government can allocate money like they've done with the infrastructure bill. There's nothing in the bill that says none of this can go to Mississippi and none of this can go to particular communities in Mississippi. Just like it says we're sending money to Wyoming for infrastructure improvement. We're sending it to Montana. We're sending it to Utah. Red states that are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly above the poverty line. There's no hindrance in that money being allocated for express purposes. But when it comes to places like Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, that's where you see the bottleneck, and that's at the state level. So again, I don't think it's really the same comparison when you're talking about allocating money. I think it's when it comes down to how that money's dispersed. That's where the problem is.
I have a question for you on that. Could the federal government allocate some money specifically for Jacksonville, so that the government cannot use it other than for the purpose?
Once it gets to Jackson, people can do what they want with it. That's the thing.
Yeah, you can declare a state of emergency, which the feds have done, particularly during the time that it was flooding. But once the flood's over and the mud is drying, but the water doesn't work, the state government has to take that funding that they get from the federal government and allocate it, and that's where the problem is. Again,
no, but where I'm coming from is, could the feds say, well, this is specifically for?
No.
Wow.
Well, they did. Not to beat a dead horse, they declared a federal emergency around the flooding event of Jackson, Mississippi, specifically for Jackson, Mississippi.
And the water problem is associated with that.
Well, the water problem is associated with run down, broken down, should have been replaced infrastructure 20 years ago, but it's not because of the taxation system that's in Mississippi that I alluded to earlier. And the allocation of those federal funds coming in can be used in an emergency situation to get water there, to get food there, to get people into shelter. That's fine, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the long-term infrastructure problems that are intractable as long as you have a Jim Crow government at the state level. That's where the problem is.
Yeah, I'll mention one more thing, and then we're gonna get off of this, okay? But in where this war was going on, now these people don't like blacks,
Good people.
And where the war to go?
Ukraine?
Yeah, Ukraine. Don't like blacks. At the same time, we got 44 million here in the U.S. and we can't get money down. We can't get money down to Jackson, but we can get it over there. That's all I want to say about that.
Well, if you want to talk about foreign governments that don't like black people, black people.
I know.
Let's talk about the recent death of the Queen of England.
Okay.
You got Negroes out here wiping tears, crying, oh boo-hoo, the Queen has passed. Now, the Queen may have been a fine woman individually, and I have sympathy for the family that lost their matriarch. That's their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother. I understand that. But from a political perspective, which is where I'm related to this, I have no feelings whatsoever about the colonizers losing their symbol. That diamond she wore in her crown, stolen.
Yep. What, 300 and some
million dollars?
Yeah.
Right. I don't even want to dwell on that. Let's just look at what colonizers do. 100 years ago, and we're not talking about, I know 100 years ago sounds like a long time ago, but we're talking in the 1920s. Great Britain had 1/5 of the world population under its auspices as colonies. And I don't think colony is a accurate enough word to depict what that means. We're talking about brutal imposition of a political and military machine on the sovereign rights of individuals in their home countries.
Yep.
So you see Kenya, Sudan, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
St. Kitts, where Paget's from, Jamaica, places with India, places with black people all over the world, brutally subjugated by the crown. And when you talk about colonization, they don't come in there and ask you nicely.
Oh, no.
They come in there with machine guns, Gatling guns. They come in there with artillery, hand grenades, knives, hanging scaffolds, rape rooms, torture rooms, people being buried up to their neck and tortured, all to get the raw resources that exist in certain parts of the world, where there are diamonds, platinum, rare minerals, cotton, tobacco. We could go on down the list. They don't have that in England. They don't have that in the islands of Europe. So where do they go? They go around the world and they take it. And that crown is the symbol of colonialism. And it makes me confounded when I look at people who were formerly enslaved by these British, who are now crying authentic tears because a 96-year-old woman passed away in comfort of natural causes. Let's talk about the millions upon millions of people who died at the edge of a bayonet or with a bullet penetrating their body or bleeding to death after being raped. Let's talk about people who had no access to education, no access to a future because of the greed of the British monarchy. And then I'm supposed to feel some kind of way? The way I feel is we need reparations. Now, let me make one last point before I don't want to dwell on this too long. Right now, Jamaica and a few other Caribbean countries are in initial discussions internally where they are about to demand reparations from Great Britain. Jamaica is at the top of that list. Now, people say, oh, it happened a long time ago. What are we talking about here? Why do we deserve reparations? Well, let's look at the other side of the coin. When Great Britain outlawed the slave trade in 1803, 1804, sometime in that time frame, and this was in the direct result of the Haitian Revolution, okay? France, Spain, England, all these European countries outlawed the transatlantic slave trade. The United States said it's illegal to import Africans into America. You think that's because they did it out of the goodness of their heart or because of that revolution that happened in Haiti? But let me make the larger point. In 1830, scarcely a generation later, you had British families who were enslavers for generation upon generation go to the British government and demand reparations. And reparations were given. Reparations were so large, it was 1/4 of the British government's budget at that time in 1830. And do you know that debt was not paid off until 2015, 7 years ago. 7 years ago, English taxpayers, Scottish taxpayers, Welsh taxpayers were paying off the debt to reimburse enslavers for having their enslaved human beings taken away from them. But when it's on the other side of the coin and the people who actually did the work, actually broke their backs, actually suffered under the system, demand reparations, that's irrelevant. We shouldn't talk about that.
And go ahead, Patrick.
Now, I was going to add to Dennis in that the people who actually worked, as he pointed out, they got zero, nothing. And who built all these things? Who built up? Who cut the cane? Who picked the cotton? Blacks.
Yeah.
Of course.
But see, the thing is that for me, And you know, I know a lot of people out there don't agree with me, but the thing is that blacks haven't fought hard enough for it, you know, for reparation, because if 50 over here want reparation, 100 over there, so all I do is I'm on my own. And that's the thing. We can have all these differences and everything, but when it comes down to some certain things, we have to pull together on them.
Well, on a surface level, I agree with you. But when you take it down a level or two, you have to understand most of our people don't know their history.
Yeah.
Most of our people don't know what these issues really entail. Yeah. Most of our people are just trying to get by day to day.
Yeah,
and they don't have time or resources or energy to allocate to something as esoteric as reparations for something that has been done to them for generations upon generations, because again, they're just trying to keep food on the table. They're trying to keep the lights on. They're trying to keep the water running when it represents a third or a fourth of their total income. So I can't blame the rank and file black members of our country for not being as strident as they should be for demanding reparations. But I bet if you explain it to them, I bet if you talk to people about what this entails and explain that it took a white supremacist government at the state level in Michigan to deliver poison water to the people of Flint.
Yeah.
It takes a white supremacist, racist government at the state level in Mississippi to deliver poison water to the people there in Jackson after a flood.
Yeah.
So if you're on the ground there and you've got children and maybe an elderly parent or someone else to take care of, you and I having this academic discussion about reparations is all nice and good, but most people just don't have time for that. So I can't put that blame on the people who are less than able to carry that fight. I put it on the people who have the wherewithal and also have the ability to express this debt that's owed, to do something about it. And that's why people like you and I and Paget, we need to talk about this and make this an issue that's brought to the forefront, put on the table so people can understand exactly what we're talking about. We're not talking about a few dollars that we wish we had. We're talking about debt that is owed. Yeah. If people understood that at the time, at the beginning of the Civil War, mm-hmm. if you looked at all the assets of the United States, mm-hmm. the coal mines, mm-hmm. the paper mills in North Carolina, mm-hmm. yep. Wall Street, manufacturing yep. in the Northeast, mm-hmm. the timber out west and in the Midwest.
Yep.
You could add all that together, and it wasn't as worth as much as a tangible asset that could be monetized and borrowed against mm-hmm. and used for development as enslaved Africans. Yeah. That's why the South fought so hard to prevent the loss of enslaved people. Yeah. So mm-hmm. that is the type of debt that we're talking about here. And it's something that again, most people don't have time to talk about that day to day and address day to day. I know I never heard my parents, and they were well-read people. Politically active people. Yeah. But I don't think it ever came to them that, you know what about the money we're owed?
Yeah.
My grandfather, not my great-grandfather, not my great-great-grandfather, my grandfather was born enslaved. He died at 102 years old in 1963.
I hear you.
So I'm not talking about something that's a theory or something that I read in a book. I'm talking about real life consequences.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess one of the things that kind of irritates me a little bit is that there was a lady, and we've talked about her, who in 1889 started trying to get reparation for the slaves, and she died in 1928 in Nashville, Tennessee. She worked her whole life trying to get reparations for the slaves, and so that that's the thing that kind of irritates me, is that nobody jumped on that. After she passed away, nobody jumped on that and tried to keep it alive and keep it going and everything.
Well, I think the fact that we know about it means that somebody was keeping it alive. But let's look at what was going on at that time. In 1884 and 1885, we have what is known as the Berlin Conference.
Yeah.
And the Berlin Conference was the Western European powers, Germany, France, Belgium, England, Spain, Portugal, deciding how they were going to break up the natural resources and assets of Africa so that they would not have to constantly be at war, which they had been at since they became organized groups identified as the Huns and the Vandals and the Visigoths. They'd always been at war. But when it came time to divvy up Africa, they said, we don't need to fight. We need to sit down at this table and divvy up all those rich natural resources, the richest continent in the world. And the Berlin Conference is what split up spheres of influence, so that now when you go to Mali, people speak French. When you go into Kenya and Nigeria, people speak English. It's because of the colonial domineering of these Western European countries. I could even go so far as to say the reason why we had World War I was because of a fight about the natural resources in Africa. And I was in high school, first time I heard details about World War I was told that Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. And this started this big fight, and it culminated in World War I, and it never made sense to me. Well, what really happened is Germany was not happy with their slice of the pie come the beginning of the 20th century, leading into World War I, because their areas were not as resource rich as some of the other areas that Belgium had, that the Dutch had, that England had. And that argument led to World War I. It wasn't Franz Ferdinand. So again, if you want to talk about reparations, if you want to talk about setting things right, we have a whole hell of a lot on the table. We could pick from a menu that'd be bigger than what you see at the Cheesecake Factory. There's issue after issue where melanated people are owed because of the machinations and wars of the Western Europeans.
Next week, we're going to really get into it. My name is Ahmad Shakaraki, and we'll catch you down in the next block for more Street Talk. Peace.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.